In the coming days, you will see weapons flowing at a record level to help Ukraine defend themselves. I expect in the coming days that there will be tariffs and sanctions available to President Trump he's never had before. I expect in the coming days more support from Europe regarding their efforts to help Ukraine. Putin made a miscalculation here. For 6 months, President Trump tried to entice Putin to the table. The attacks have gone up, not down. One of the biggest miscalculations Putin has made is to play Trump. And you just watch. In the coming days and weeks, there's going to be a massive effort to get Putin to the table. And to those who are helping him, China buying cheap Russian oil and having no accountability, those days.
And that's just a recent clip from South Carolina Senator, U.S. Senator Lindsey, the neocon McCain Graham. One example of many that I could give. A man who just wants a perpetual war somewhere in the world. He has just an absolute hatred of Russia, as many do. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about 4 causes of Russophobia, or a hatred of Russia. And I'm asking the question, why is it that so many people in the West hate Russia? Why is this? Let's pause for a moment and do some investigating and see if we can get to the root causes of why so many people hate Russia. The EU hates Russia, as we know. Starmer, Macron, and on it goes. And so many in the West hate Russia. The neocons hate Russia. Why is this? Why did John McCain and Lindsey Graham go to Ukraine during the Obama administration to give their full-throated support and American support to the war against Russia, to repel Russia, because Russia was doing the right thing, of course? It's interesting that you had 2 American senators there essentially doing the work of statecraft, but they weren't there under authorization from Obama. As far as I know, they were just kind of like free agents doing their own thing, just kind of winging it. Why were they there? It's interesting, isn't it, that they were there in Kiev in a few years ago. They had some kind of vested interest in all of this. But anyway, let's not get sidetracked there. I want to get to the Russophobia. Why is it that so many people hate Russia? This hatred is just inbred with so many people. But let's just pause and call a timeout and step back for a moment, investigate why exactly this is. And I'm going to give you 4 reasons. The first reason is this, in no particular order. The first cause of Russophobia is this: neocons, that is people who just want war. They just want perpetual war. This philosophy transcends parties. It's Republicans, it's Democrats, and they are pretty much the majority in Congress right now, and they hold great sway and influence, unfortunately, over President Trump as I speak. But neocons receive a financial benefit, folks, from a perpetual war footing with Russia and the military expansionism of the United States. They've got a lot at stake by us being at war. They've got a lot at stake by investing in Ukraine, which they have done. Now, why is this? Because, folks, as the late, great General Smedley Butler said about 100 years ago, the great Marine general, war is a racket. And what he means by that is that war is a place where a lot of evil people, in this case neocons, profit. That is an insidious and evil thing, if you ask me, to have someone profiting off of war. This should never be the case, but there are people such as the Cheneys and other neocons who have personally profited from defense contractors and investments in the same. And it is to their financial benefit for us to be on a war footing with just about anybody, but especially with Russia, because they see Russia through the lens of the old Soviet Union, and they have not, as I've said before, updated their files. They refuse to see Russia as something other than what it actually is. They want to keep the Cold War going because it is to their financial profit and benefit. If you recall when Senator John McCain, the late Senator neocon war-loving fraud John McCain, ran for the presidency in the year 2000 against Barack Obama, when asked about Russia and President Vladimir Putin, old man McCain noted that when he sees Vladimir Putin, when he looks into his eyes, he sees three things: KGB. I mean, how are we going to make progress in our relations with Russia, or anybody else for that matter, when we're still reading from an old script? We refuse to see that things have changed in Russia. And we just foment this hatred of Russia that is to our own personal benefit. These people profit from a war footing with Russia. They want to see Russia destroyed and balkanized so that they can control this region of the world. This is what Project Ukraine is all about. This is what the global elites are all about. They want to seize Russia, folks, and destroy it in its present form. That's what they're after. And Vladimir Putin is standing in their way. And that's why they hate him. And that's why they hate Russia. And that's why you have people like Lindsey McCain Graham, who has literally called for of Vladimir Putin. He repeatedly called for some Russian citizen to rise up and do this to Vladimir Putin. Can you imagine a United States Senator saying that? He said, basically, somebody in Germany should have taken out the H-man, but somebody in Russia needs to do the same thing. So that is one cause of Russophobia, is because neocons receive financial benefit from us being perpetually at war with Russia, ostensibly, or really anybody else. Now that feeds into the second reason, or the second cause of Russophobia, which is this prevailing Cold War mentality that so many in the West and so many Americans have latched onto. Now, there was a time when we had the Cold War, of course, and this is during the time when the Soviet Union had supplanted, since the time of the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, the Soviet Union had come to power. Communism had taken over the land, and the state religion basically at that time became atheism from what it was, which was Orthodox Christianity. And we began a decades-long existence with Russia as being seen as a threat for much, not all of those times. We were actually allied with Russia in what they call the Great War. We were never educated about this in American public schools. We call it the Second World War. They call it the Great War. And they had a lot of successes themselves in that. And we were basically allied with Russia during that time. But anyway, you come forward, 1950s, 1960s. You may remember the Secretary Khrushchev saying that he was going to take us down without firing a shot, banging his shoe on the podium at the United Nations. And we were in this era of the Cold War and the perpetual threat of a nuclear exchange between the two great powers of the world, the United States and Russia. And children in American government schools were taught were taught drills in the event of a nuclear exchange. We were to get up under our desk and all that sort of thing. Now, that was a little bit before my time. Not much, but a little bit. And we had this constant threat hovering over us for at least 30 years, I would say, at least. And it was a real threat. There was a real chance we could go to war with the communistic Soviet Union, which would be a nuclear war, which would be devastating, of course, for the entire world. Now, as you know, in 1991, the Soviet Union fell. Thank God. The Soviet Union fell. And from the ashes of the Soviet Union was birthed a new nation called Russia. And this land has historically been called Russia or Holy Rus. I'll get to more of that in just a moment. The new rebirthed nation of Russia, which eventually came to be led by President Putin eventually. Of course, there were other leaders first, such as President Yeltsin and Gorbachev, of course. This new nation was not a communist nation like the Soviet Union had been, nor did they have the same worldview, nor were they intrinsically atheistic. It was a rebirth of Christianity, which is the heritage of Russia. If you go back and study enough Russian history, you'll understand this. And now the locks were ostensibly taken off the church doors, and clergy, many of whom had been martyred under previous regimes, were now restored to their churches, and the church flourished under the rebirth of Russia. But in the West, a lot of people did not make this mental transition in their minds that the old Soviet Union was dead and Russia was now born from the ashes of its death. And as I have said repeatedly on this program, we had in the West a golden opportunity to hit the reset button with the new burgeoning nation of Russia and change the entire world for the better. But the neocons in government and outside of government, NGOs, defense contractors, it was more beneficial to them, as I mentioned in my first point, for us to maintain a war footing with this new rebirthed nation of Russia. We would rather be at war, ostensibly, than at peace. We would rather be enemies than friends. Now, in what universe does that make any sense? If we have the opportunity, my friends, to be friends with any world power, is that not preferable to our being enemies and our being hostile with one another? So the second cause, I would say, of Russophobia, and all the reasons I'm going to give you, there may be more. I'm giving you the four that I came up with. But the second cause is the Cold War mentality, which is no longer applicable, but it still exists here in 2025 in many people in and out of government in the West. They still see Russia through the lens of the Soviet Union. They have not updated their files, and that is really unfortunate. All right, let's move on. And I'm going to spend some time on this third point because I'll tell you, let me hit point number 4. No, I'll leave it the way it is. The third cause of Russophobia, in my opinion, I will give you 2 words for this cause, or 2 initials and a name, and that name would be C.I. Scofield. Now, I'm going to eventually do another show dedicated to this man, Cyrus Scofield, but I just want to mention him in passing now, because what happened is this in the West. Cyrus Scofield, with the backing of the Rothschilds, the Jewish well-financed family empire, the Rothschilds, took a Bible in the late 1800s and he wrote his own personally gained commentary of said Bible, and he gave his own private interpretation of every verse in the Bible, which he would write, basically, in the margin notes of the infamous Scofield Bible. And with the backing of the Rothschilds, this Bible was published, and it gained great acceptance among evangelicals in the West, particularly in America, especially among many Baptist Americans and many Pentecostal Americans and charismatics. They held in great esteem the Scofield Bible, not the Bible, the Scofield Bible. And as I said, this Bible came complete with the Scofield liner notes, and so many people in evangelical fundamentalism took the Scofield liner notes as gospel. What Scofield had said about any given particular verse in the Bible, they took that as being what the verse actually meant, if you see what I'm saying. Now, one of the cardinal rules of Christianity is that we don't interpret the Scriptures privately for obvious reasons, folks. You could get me and somebody else sitting side by side. We could read a verse from the Bible, and then we could both answer the question, what does that verse mean? Both of us could be pious, devout Christians, but we could give you two very different answers about this Scripture we're reading. If we came about its meaning in a private manner, we could both say, well, wait a minute, I'm listening to the Lord. I'm listening to the Holy Spirit. This is what this verse means. And the other guy says, that's not what it means at all. This is how we have come upon so many different denominations, groups, and sects, SECTS, because of the private interpretation of Scripture. And this is exactly how the Scofield Bible was published. It was one man's interpretation of the Holy Scriptures, and his privately gained interpretations have led to the most ludicrous, wrong, and downright evil understandings of the Scriptures. Scofield, among other things, I don't want to get too bogged down here, but this ties in with Russophobia. Scofield promoted the heresy of dispensationalism, which is a errant, eschatological, end times theology, false theology. And he also managed in his Bible to paint the looming rebirth nation of Israel as the God's chosen nation and God's chosen people, and a sign that when it happened, that would be the sign of the end times. When Israel was reformed as a nation, that would be the sign of the end times, and that was going to lead within a generation to something called the rapture, which is something that never has been taught in the history of Christianity. This was Scofield. And of course, from his eschatological meanderings, his errant-filled interpretations, people began to see the nation, the Soviet Union and its capital city of Moscow, which is pretty much directly above Jerusalem. They began to see Russia as the great bear, the evil bear that is going to one day make war against Israel, and that's where the Antichrist is going to come from, and that's before the rapture and the second, all this nuttiness that came from C.I. Scofield. If you ever see a Scofield Bible, my best advice to you is use it for kindling, because it is chock full of false teachings from the pen of this man, C.I. Scofield. So much of what he wrote in his margin notes was nothing but false teaching and error, something the church has never taught in over 2,000 years of history. So the teachings of Scofield, which shaped the theology, the false theology, of so many millions of evangelical fundamentalists, fomented naturally this hatred of Russia, which is seen as the great Satan in the eyes of so many evangelical fundamentalists, or has been until recent memory. Now, thank God, a lot of American Christians are beginning to separate themselves from this worldview, this erroneous teaching that was begun by Scofield and has been expanded on, of course, by many others today. Eloquent speakers such as John Hagee in San Antonio, Texas, who pretty much holds to the Scofield view, and there's many others I could mention. But a lot of Americans who identify as evangelicals or evangelical fundamentalists, they are beginning to eschew, if you will, the teachings and the influence of Scofield, and that is a very good thing. Now, I want to expound on this point briefly by talking about the religious history of Russia, which was known back in the day as Holy Rus. So bear with me because this is instructive. Now, we are taught, legend has it, that one of the apostles of Jesus Christ, that would be the Apostle Andrew. Let me get a sip of coffee. The Apostle Andrew, many teach, one of the apostles of Christ from the New Testament, visited the land, so this would be in the first 100 years of Christianity, visited the land that would eventually become Kiev, and probably did some missionary work there. And I can't speak to the fruit of that work until about 1,000 years later. This is around the year 988, and this is a very important year. At this time, we had what was called Byzantium or Byzantine Christianity, which now it's not that so much anymore, but it had great influence in terms of Christianity in this part of the world. And there were Byzantine missionaries that went to what was called the Kievan Rus was the name of it. It's today Kiev. Kiev, of course, was historically always a part of Russia. But Orthodox missionaries from the Byzantine Empire landed in Kievan Rus in the 10th century. This is a very pivotal date in history. Their missionary work in Kievan Rus led to the conversion of the Prince Vladimir, the leader of Kievan Rus. It led to the conversion of Prince Vladimir to Christianity, specifically Orthodox Christianity, which was the only kind of Christianity there was at that particular time. It was about to change. But Prince Vladimir became a Christian through the efforts of the Byzantine missionaries who had arrived in Kiev, Russia, or Kiev Rus. Now, the conversion of the prince led to what was essentially a revival, if you will, in Holy Rus, so much so that a lot of missionary efforts were sent forth throughout the land with the support of Prince Vladimir, and the region began to be converted to the Christian religion. So much so, it took such a foothold in Rus that Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, became the official state religion of Holy Rus under the watchful eye of Prince Vladimir. And it began; these missionaries began working, as I said, throughout Holy Rus. Prince Vladimir had he had several sons. Two of his sons were Boris and Gleb, Gleb, Boris and Gleb, and they were dedicated Christians, and they helped and aided in this effort to convert all of Rus into a Christian nation, which it did become. And it's often the story through efforts like this. Boris and Gleb were martyred for their faith. It's always the blood of martyrs that advances Christianity, but that's how this happened. And of course, these missionaries were working throughout Russia, establishing churches, and they were translating religious texts into the Slavic language so that the Russian people could understand Christianity, and they converted to same. And since that time, that's been the way it is in much of Russia, with, of course, the exception of the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. Now, of course, at this time, and we're talking about well over 1,000 years ago, Alaska was a part of Russia, and the missionary efforts extended into the land of Alaska, which was part of Holy Rus. And you had Orthodox missionaries, Christian missionaries, such as Saint Innocent and Saint Herman and Peter the Aleut and many others, who went to Alaska, which is Russian territory at this time, and they converted many of the natives and the Aleuts to the Orthodox Christian faith. And you still see the result of their missionary efforts today in Alaska. As I said in a recent video, you still see the results of these missionary efforts there with Russian Orthodox churches and a lot of Christians, and there are some saints who are buried in Alaska, and that's a source of pilgrimage for many Orthodox Christians who go to these holy sites to venerate these saints. But this is what happened, and this was in the year 988 when Holy Rus became Christianized, and it became a Christian nation and a beacon to the world. I bet a lot of you Americans listening to me right now never knew this. I never knew this. I was never taught this, but it's true. Russia was a beacon of Christianity for the entire known world at that time. But what happened less than 100 years later has resulted in a lot of division since that time, to say the least. What you had at that time was Orthodox Christianity. Prior to the Great Schism, if you were a Christian, you were an Orthodox Christian. That's just the way it was. That's not to say there weren't schisms and different groups that were trying to teach something else. That was true in the time of St. Paul, as we see in the New Testament epistles. But the Orthodox Church was the representation of Christ on the earth, and if you were a Christian, you were an Orthodox Christian. But there came this division between, there were 5 patriarchs who ruled over the Orthodox Church at the time, and one of the patriarchs, you had the Russian patriarch, you had Alexandria in Egypt, you had Jerusalem, you had Antioch, and you had Rome. Well, the Roman patriarch began to see himself as being more than just one of the patriarchs, and he began to promote this idea, which became papal supremacy. And along with the other 4 patriarchs, they were unable, of course, to reconcile this idea within the church, because the church has never taught that we just have one pope. My apologies if you're Roman Catholic watching me, but I'm just trying to give you an accurate account of what happened. And so the church became divided, basically the West from the East, basically over 2 main issues. One of them was papal supremacy, and another issue was an issue with the Nicene Creed. The West, the Rome, was basically twisting the creed to say something it had not originally said. And of course, to this day, we still employ the Nicene Creed in all of our services. We still say the creed. You can look it up online. And there were other issues, maybe a little bit more minor than these, but these divisions between the East and the West led to what is known as the Great Schism, a most unfortunate event in history, right up there with Judas Iscariot betraying the Savior. And you had basically in 1054, the Great Schism, and that is when Rome separated from the Orthodox Church, and we got the Roman Catholic Church, and then you had the Orthodox Church teaching two different things. So, of course, it is the view of the Orthodox Church that the Roman Church fell into schism, and that is our view to this day. Now, of course, a lot of Roman Catholics will give you their view, which is exactly the opposite of that, so it's just up to you to make up your own determination about that. Now, about 500 years later, you had what came to be known as the Protestant Reformation. Now, I'm going somewhere with this, so bear with me here. This was, of course, Martin Luther, who was at one time a Roman Catholic monk, and Martin Luther had an issue with the excesses of the Roman Catholic Church, and he was right in a lot of what he said. And you've no doubt heard the story of Luther nailing the 95 Theses on the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral and things of this nature. But Luther's actions were pivotal to the start of what is known as the Protestant Reformation. Now, the Protestant Reformation was a reaction against the Roman Catholic Church, not the Orthodox Church. That is an incredibly important distinction to be made. Luther did not have a beef with the Orthodox Church. He had a beef with the Roman Catholic Church, and that was what his thesis was all about. Now, the fact of the matter is that prior to his death, Luther was engaging in correspondence with an Orthodox patriarch, and the belief is that Luther was actually headed east, as we say, to join himself to the original church, the Orthodox Church. But sadly, he died before that could happen. Now, it was from the Protestant Reformation, folks, in the 1500s that we got this virtual landslide of denominations and sects, S-E-C-T-S, and groups, all claiming to have the truth, most of them claiming the Bible is their standard of truth, yet they all teach different things. How is that possible? And this is what has happened. There are now 20, some estimates are up to 40,000 different denominations, groups, and sects within Protestantism, all of them teaching the same thing about Christianity. I'm sorry, all of them teaching different things about Christianity, and all of them saying they have the truth. You've got the Baptists, you've got the Methodists, you've got the Presbyterians, you've got the Wesleyans, you've got the Lutherans, you've got the Pentecostals, the Anabaptists, and on and on and on and on it goes. And they all say they have the truth, but they all teach something different. And they were all a reaction against the excesses of the Roman Catholic Church. And they all pretty much hold to this theory of the invisible church, which is a bogus theory because the church is not invisible. She is visible and she is one. Throughout this entire time, the Orthodox Church maintained the faith of Christ and the apostles. That is our belief. That is what we maintain to this day and age. Now, I bring all that up because it kind of ties in with the fourth cause of Russophobia, because Russia is a seat of Orthodox Christianity in the world. That's not to say there aren't Protestants in Russia. There are. That's not to say there aren't Roman Catholics in Russia. There are. That's not to say there aren't Muslims or Buddhists or Shinto or Hindus in they have a plethora of religions still in Russia, but the predominant religion in modern day Russia is Orthodox Christianity. We have Patriarch Kirill, who is my patriarch actually. I attend a Russian, there are several dioceses within Orthodoxy. There's Greek, there's Russian, there's Antiochian, there's the Jerusalem Patriarch, and on it goes. So you've got all of these groups, but the primary religion in in Russia, historically Holy Rus, is Orthodox Christianity. Now, a lot of Protestants have not really embraced the idea of studying the history of the church and the place and the role of orthodoxy within that history. Here is what so many Protestants in America see. They see that we kiss icons. They see that we pray to saints and you pray to dead people and all that. I don't want to get too far into the weeds with all of this because I'm going to do another show just about this. And you burn incense, you have incense in your churches and all this, and your priests dress up in all this garb, and all that is true. There's a reason for all of this, and the primary reason is because all of this has always been taught in the history of Christianity. But not enough Americans who are of the Protestant ideology do the legwork that's required to understand all this. So many of them are, their idea of Christianity is based on feelings and emotionalism and emotional feelings and responses to stimuli. That is why so many American Protestant churches, their architecture is bland and boring, and when you go inside, it's set up like a theater for the performing arts. There's no icons, there's no beautiful architecture. It's just it's showtime. You know, you get 4 or 5 people on the stage with microphones performing, entertaining. You might have a Starbucks in the lobby. Give me a break. This has never been true in the history of Christianity. And so many of these people look at Orthodox Christianity as being something that it is not. They believe they have the right idea about Christianity. And this is vital to understanding Russophobia because, as I say, Russia is a historically Orthodox Christian land, and Vladimir Putin is an Orthodox Christian. And that, for many American Protestants, is unacceptable. If you're an Orthodox Christian, you're not really a Christian. You're kind of like Roman Catholics. You're not really a Christian because you do all of those weird things. And real Christians don't do that because my Bible says this. Hello, C.I. Scofield. Actually, Orthodox Christianity is the big leagues of Christianity. And this is what Christianity has historically been since the time of Christ. I am a former Pentecostal evangelical fundamentalist. I am no longer that because I wanted the truth, and the truth meant more than anything to me at one time, still does. And the truth led me on a search for the real church, and that is what I found. But we'll get more into that in a subsequent program. These are 4 reasons why I believe we have hatred of Russia in the West. These are 4 reasons that are the causes of Russophobia. So there you have it. All about Russophobia. Hey, if you have it, take a pill and get over it. Russia is not the Soviet Union. Putin is not Stalin or Lenin. He is a Christian man who loves God, goes to church regularly, unlike others I could mention. Don't hate Russia. If you're suffering from TDR, no, it would be Russia Derangement Syndrome, whatever the acronym would be, get over it. Get over it. Understand it's people like Lindsey Graham who just don't understand what's going on because they don't understand the history of Russia, the current day existence of Russia, and they don't understand Christianity, quite frankly. So there you have it. I'd love to have your comments down below. Let me hear what you've got to say. Give me a like on the video if you would, and subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate that. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will see you soon. Okay, stop the presses and hold the phone because I forgot something that is extremely important. It's one of the other reasons, maybe it falls into one of the aforementioned categories, but I'm at a Bucky station, by the way. You see that? So I'm sorry for the shaky video, but I really need to insert this into the video. because it's vitally important. Another reason why so many people have this sort of predisposition to hate Russia. Naturally, I should have included the fact that in 2015 and 2016, thanks to Lord Obama and Hillary Rodham Clinton, we had the Russia hoax. And for years now, folks, 10 years, when you stop and think about it, for 10 years, thanks to the complicit mainstream media and the modern Democratic Party, and really the Republican Party as well, we heard over and over and over and over again that our elections were interfered with by Russia, and Obama Clinton commissioned this phony Steele dossier, which was supposed to prove, and they had the FBI go along with, and this was supposed to prove that Putin tinkered in our elections, and we were told this repeatedly. And as we all know by now, it has all turned out to be nothing but one big fat lie. And we have the proof of this. And these people should be in prison, at least, if you ask me, that kept telling the American people that Russia / Putin had interfered in the American elections. And there was a Russian interference, and it's the evil Putin, the madman Putin, who's trying to take over all of Europe, if not the world. And it's evil Russia. And this was pummeled into the American people, and the only people who didn't fall for it are the people who took the time and effort to actually do their own legwork and their own investigation to figure out whether or not this was actually factual or not. Of course, as we know now, it was not factual. There was no Russian interference in the elections. Putin had nothing to do with interfering in our elections whatsoever. But since so many people heard this over and over and over again, and all the neocons of the deep state and the media, their bedfellows, were telling us how evil Russia is, how evil Putin is, after a while that just became part of the national consciousness, and so many millions of Americans just believed it was true because that's what everybody was saying. The politicians were saying it, the media was saying it, a lot of clergy were saying it, and that's all people heard. And it was all a lie. But that wrong information was the basis for people to justify their hatred of Russia and of Putin. Folks, ultimately, this really does come down to a situation of good versus evil. It's as simple as that. It is good versus evil. We have a lot of really evil people in the body politic in America that hate Russia, that hate Putin, and quite frankly, they hate the fact that Russia actually has religious moorings, and these evil people despise that. I am telling you, at the root of all of this, this is actually a spiritual battle. It is truly good versus evil, and we've got to decide which side we're on. Now I think I'm done. Thanks for watching.